There you go.
And I'm going to go, got it. And I presume everybody can see my screen.
Yep.
Very good. Well, as Bonnie kind of did the introductions, and with this small group, I want everyone just to feel open to ask any questions. I think the way Tobin and I put this program together is kind of from the perspective of either the chief ref or the in the UCI world, the PCP or president of the commissaires panel. And but again, stop us if you have any questions, and kind of we'll go from there. How we kind of came about this at the NTC, I guess I should give you a little bit of background, is so many of our up and coming mountain bike officials don't get a chance to get the experience in the gravity world. And we thought it might be beneficial to the officials here to have a little exposure to what the gravity side of mountain biking is all about. So Tobin, you have anything else to add there?
Yeah, I think you said it all, Michael.
Wonderful. All right, moving on to our next slide. I'm going to turn it over to Tobin.
Sure. So we didn't really know what our audience would be like if they were going to be people that had experience with gravity-centric mountain bike races. So we decided to go ahead and define what a mountain bike downhill race is. It's a time trial format. Gravity is involved, so the start is at a higher elevation than where they finish. And the riders are being tested on a lot of technical proficiency throughout the course. So on courses today, you'll see routes, rocks, jumps, drops, and then right there in the middle is the definition that comes straight from our rule book about what a downhill is. The downhill event is going to be composed of 3 different runs, if you will, or in practice, it might be more than 1 run. But the first one is a practice, and that's going to be mandatory at a UCI event or at our national championship event, 2 practice runs. And we're wanting that to happen to ensure that all of the riders have familiarized themselves with the course. Again, they can be very technical in nature, so that they're going to be able to understand where they need to maintain the most control in the highest technical areas. Qualifying and seeding is the next run that would happen in a downhill event. So qualifying is done because there may be a limited number of time slots for the finals. You might have 1,000 participants that sign up, but on the final day of racing, you will only have time to run 500 of them. So qualifying is only allowing the top contenders to move forward. Seeding is how the finals will be run. And we run the finals in the slowest time to fastest time order. So the slowest racers go first, the faster racers go towards the very end of the finals. Sometimes qualifying and seeding are done with separate runs, and sometimes they're combined and done in the same run. With the finals run, new to the UCI World Cup this year, is actually a semifinal run. So basically there's going to be 2 different final runs, and there will be points that go towards the World Cup that come from the semifinal round as well as the final round. And that's a brand new thing to UCI racing. Next slide.
Oops, there we go.
There we go. So the roots of downhill racing date back to the 70s. Marin County, which is north of the San Francisco Bay Area, they were taking cruiser bikes with these big fat balloon tires and running them down Jeep roads or fire roads. And it was whoever could get from the top to the bottom the fastest. And it was inspired a bit by downhill ski racing, where it's the same thing. You go from the top of the mountain to the bottom. There are turns, but it's not turn focused like a slalom ski racing. Next slide. It morphed over time from the 70s to the 80s to have courses that run more directly in the fall line and that have more technical features. That raises the adrenaline factor for the racers, and as well, the spectators get to see a little bit better show, if you will, as they watch the racers do miraculous things with their bikes. And I'm going to turn it back over to Michael for this next slide.
We kind of put this together, very similar, I'm sure, to a lot of the events you do now. You know, you're reaching out to the event organizers with pre-race communication, logistics, thinking about the venue itself. Have they ever raced on it previously? What level of experience and timing company, all of that. Tobin and I put this together because these are kind of the things that you should be doing ahead of time before an event. You should be discussing with the event organizers about a medical operations plan. A lot of times downhills will be hosted at ski areas, so you'll have ski patrollers on site to assist with medical. Maybe a local ambulance or fire department might be there that you'll be reaching out to and working with them to provide medical support. Another unique aspect of downhill is you need a shuttle or access to get riders to the top of the mountain to the start or top of the hill. For example, like Sea Otter Classic that's hosted at the Laguna Seca Speedway, they actually just have box vans that'll haul the riders and the bikes to the top of the mountain. Again, if you're at a ski area, the actual chairlift will provide riders with the access there. But it's really important for you to know ahead of time before an event, you know, what is the access to the start going to be. The other thing that's important to discuss is the weather forecast for the weekend. You need to have daily briefings on the weather. Who would make the call? For example, I work for 2 ski areas here in New Mexico, and we have pretty rigid rules that guide our operations. If we have lightning within a 5-mile radius, we would stop the lift. Anyway, those kinds of things are important to know ahead of time prior to an event that you may have some logistics. Let's assume that a lift breaks or you do have a rain out of some event. Are there alternative ways to get the event run once the weather or the safety hazard is cleared? Once you get on site, you'll want to do a pre-event course inspection, looking at all aspects of the course. You know, are there any issues or hazards that need to get addressed? Also, prior to an event, you're going to have a course marshal's briefing that will usually happen daily with the course marshals and medical teams. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the presentation, but it's really important that these course marshals understand their role for the event, also have good situational awareness on where they might be located on the course. Typically at like a UCI event, you'll actually have a published downhill course walk by the athletes, and then that is usually followed by you know, a lot of times of practice on the course, and then usually after the first practice session, that is when you host your team managers riders meeting, an opportunity for them to give you some feedback on the course if there's an unusual concern by the coaches or riders at that time. As Tobin discussed, from there we would do, once practice is over, everybody's had their allotted 2 practice runs, we would then move into the qualifying / seeding aspects of the event. Based on the seeding runs, we would post a start list. And again, as Tobin said, based on the seated riders, the fastest riders will go last. We kind of invert the start order there. From the start list being posted, you'll have the downhill finals, post the results, upload the results to USA Cycling. Very important to schedule time in your travel schedule before you leave an event, to have a debrief with the event organizers as well as the officials team. And then also don't forget your post-event report to send that to UCI. Any questions on any of the downhill checklist? Very good. We'll move on to our next slide. This is kind of what a typical Marshal's briefing occurs. This is the time actually where you'll probably hand out a course map, and usually located throughout a downhill course. There will be Marshals points on there. Each one of these individuals in the vest here will be assigned a Marshal point, for example, like Marshal point 1. And I've got some examples of the signs there. That's really important that they understand their role there. They'll have a red flag and a yellow flag at all times. During practice, they'll use the yellow flag. The red flag is usually set aside only for competition, and also should be set down, never held in the hand of a rider's. Sometimes they hold them in their hand and a rider comes through, it looks like they're waving it, and we've had some confusion there. But again, these Marshals are really important to understand where they are on the course. Again, at what Marshal point, if they ever had to call for medical assistance in, it's important for them to know where they are and how we can access the medical system as quickly as we can for riders. Tobin, you have anything to add here?
At UCI events, they're going to be issued a whistle as well, and they'll have a short blast on their whistle as a rider passes. Usually not during practice. Usually that's going to be during the qualifying seeding round and finals.
Yes, good point.
If you watch footage on Red Bull TV, or I guess it's being broadcast on different networks this year, you'll hear during the entire broadcast all of these whistle blasts.
I think it's really important to note that you need to be having daily briefings, because a lot of times we'll do the qualifying or practice qualifying seeding on day 1 and then the finals on day 2. You might not have the same volunteers each day. So it's really important each morning to conduct a very thorough course briefing with the course marshals as well as your medical team. Moving on, this is what a downhill start looks like. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Tobin.
So you'll see the picture over on the left. That's the ramp that comes out of the start house, and the 2 yellow fencing panels go into white tape. That's going to be the racer's line. And then you see tape on the far right side of it and the far left side of it. And then there's a space in between, and that's called the B zone. And no one is to be in that zone. The spectators would be on the far outside right, far outside left. And that's just to ensure spectator and rider safety. If by chance there's a mishap and they go off course, we want the spectators far away from the action. That way nobody gets hurt. Over on the right-hand side at the top, you see what's called a photo cell. Many different manufacturers make them, but it's a laser beam that is aligned with the starting line. They'll also align one with the finish line. And when the leading edge of the bicycle tire hits that laser, a signal is sent to either a stopwatch or timing equipment of some sort to be able to create a split. So we know exactly down to the thousandth of a second when the racer started and when he finished. I just said the thousandths of a second. In gravity events, we only time down to the hundredths of a second, but this equipment is precise enough to be able to go down to the thousandths. Down below, you'll see the inside of a start house, and you'll see a little fiberglass wand that is directly in front of the racer's tire. And when the racer starts, they will move that wand forward, which then triggers that same exact split on the stopwatch or timing equipment.
I should also note here, in some instances, they'll actually have transponders on there. So right there where you see the start ramp, there would be a mat on the ground. And as soon as the tire crosses the mat, it would start the timing. I'm sure many of you have seen those at other events you've worked at as well.
One more thing that I'll point out in that start house, if you look over to the left, their left arm, left handlebar grip, it was leaning against a board, and that's common through the start houses. The racers will start with leaning against that board with their feet on the pedal. Here's a finish line, Mont Saint Anne and then Snowshoe. And they'll have the photo cells down at the finish when the leading edge of that bicycle tire hits that laser beam, that signal sent to stop the racer's time. This snowshoe picture I was actually further left of the photo, and you can see there's a photographer down there at the bottom, and they were getting pretty close to the photo cell equipment. So I was having to play bodyguard and go over and move photographers out of the way. That way they wouldn't inadvertently knock over the photo cells. So the downhill hot seat. So when the very first finisher finishes for the finals round, they will take the top step of what's called the hot seat. And as the race progresses and as faster times are produced by racers that start later back in the start order, they will unseat these guys that are here on the hot seat. So if somebody unseats first moves to second moves to third, and then third is out of there. But this hot seat is right next to the finish line. So these guys are sitting there and just watching the race unfold and seeing if they get to maintain their place or if they're going to be unseated.
At the World Cup level, Red Bull has, this has just been kind of another aspect of the show that has been, kind of hyped up, and it's pretty neat. When you go back and see an event that's been, broadcasted, just another dimension of this makes it really neat. I'll take over from here. This is showing a little bit how a downhill course is marked or taped. At a World Cup level, you'll see the entire course taped both sides. And I'm sure Tobin would echo this. A lot of your local races or smaller races, very unlikely that you'll find the entire course taped. But I think for sure, from a safety aspect, you should, any highly technical areas, or if there's an area where you've got a lot of spectators, you should work with the promoter to provide some sort of tape or fencing in those areas. In this other picture to your left, you'll see some padding. We'll discuss that a little bit more as we go through the slides. This next slide is what I was referring to about Marshal checkpoints. Again, at your Marshal's briefing, who's ever at Marshal point number 1 will get a course map, and then he knows where he's at. You'll also see various markings for the athletes about gap jump, but typically course markings on downhills, the technical aspects are delineated with the arrow system. The slide or the photo that you will see on your right shows 3 arrows going down, which highlights a highly technical section of the course, kind of forewarning that. And usually you'll have that uphill, a few meters of the actual drop off or the steep section. But I think the signage here on this particular one is really important. That again, your marshals know where they're at. If we have an injured rider or whatever, they can radio in injured rider at Marshal Point 8. You know, you'll also see padding here. That's, you know, you can't pad the entire downhill course. You know, you've got to look at aspects kind of where impact zones where a rider or gravity might pull the athlete as they're tumbling. And that's usually how we, you know, delineate where to put the pads on that. Tobin, do you have anything to add here?
What race was this from, Michael?
This particular race was the Latin American, or excuse me, Pan American Continental Championships in Costa Rica.
Very cool.
This is a very technical rock featured section that was actually came from Mount St. Anne. As you'll see, you know, it's well marked at the takeoff and the landing area. If you look over the first picture to your right, you'll see what we call the B, not to be confused with B zone, but the B line for riders that don't want to go off the technical section. Most areas at a World Cup course will have a B line around it that you can get around it. You'll also see, looking off further down the hill, what Tobin was referring to as a B zone, and that's just to keep spectators a safer distance off the course. Some of the speeds and you know, potential for a rider to get out of control as they land potentially could injure a spectator on the side of the hill. I probably should have posted a picture. This particular area at Mount St. Anne, you might have upwards of 1,000 people on the side of the downhill course during an event at a place like this. And of course, you know, not everybody knows how to conduct themselves. This particular feature is another event that I was at that I thought showed a nice takeoff and landing area. And these are all things that you need to be aware of in looking at features as you're doing your course walk down or inspection, and make sure that it is marked accordingly. This final slide again highlights a tree that was kind of in an impact zone right in the middle of the trail that we had padded, but you have to be selective. You can't pad the entire course, or just isn't enough padding. You also need to pay attention to branding, banners, things like that get put on the side of the course. You want to make sure that they are not endangering athletes or too coarse to the area where we've got competition. Any questions so far on anything we've covered?
Tony had one in regard to stakes. Any restrictions on stake used appear to be rebar in some of the photos.
Yeah, this Tony, this is what they'll use is like a section of rebar that's about 18 inches long, and they'll pound it in the ground. The upper part is just usually that gray PVC conduit is what I see used mostly. With that, I will turn it back over to Tobin to discuss best practices.
So if you're a chief referee, one thing that you're going to want to do is take a look at the registrant list and ensure that you've got the amount of schedule that you need to be able to do practice qualifying seeding rounds. If you notice a week out that there's an excessive number of registrants, getting that communicated to the race director to revise the schedule, and then getting that out to the racers is a good idea. Sooner is better, communicating these sorts of changes. And then as well, making sure that that's posted at the race site, and as racers pick up their number plates, that they're apprised of any sort of time changes, be it practice, qualifying, seating, etc. Course inspection, make sure that as you're doing that to take a lot of photos. That way you're going to be able to better communicate with organizers, course directors, anything where tape might be down, or any additional padding that you might that you see might need to be put up. Look at your starting intervals once your finals have been determined, even in qualifying seating, and ensure that there's a large enough time gap between groups. We will typically arrange qualifying seating from slowest to fastest times as well, projected for that specific group, and it just ensure that you've got a big enough gap that way a faster group isn't going to overtake a slower group that started in front of them. Mandatory practice runs. One way to do it is to get a registration list, and then if practice spans over multiple days, write down the date and the time of each of the two practices. Other options are to use a Sharpie and mark on the racer's number plate. You might have one color for run 1, another color for run 2. And I've even used stickers before where I've got 2 different types of stickers. One denotes that they've come through for their first run. The other denotes that they've come through for their second run.
I guess I should note also here, depending on weather conditions or issues with the lift or any other circumstance, I have allowed the seeding run to be counted as their second run.
As a starter, running kind of the start area, good best practice is to keep between 6 to 8 riders between you where you're starting and the whip roll call person. It's going to be easier for that whip or roll call to insert riders that might have arrived after the initial roll call. And then the other thing that does is that the whip and roll call area can get a bit noisy, and that'll remove that noise or push it further away from the start, which is going to allow the starter to have better concentration on what they're doing. This is a best practice taught to me by Michael Donovan. Have a volunteer or official fill in for you as a ghostwriter for any DNSs that happen. That official or volunteer walks up and they'll say, hey, I'm rider 282 who's going to be DNS for the day. And then I have them stand there through the start sequence, and then they walk away. Michael Donovan likes to, once they arrive, he goes and he stands on the starting line as the starter, just to ensure that he doesn't, or anybody would not end up misstarting a rider. I've got next 2 slides are 2 different examples of start lists that I've worked with. This one here has all of the times from the very first starter to the very last starter in the second column. And where there is a gap between different categories, you'll see that there are ghost riders that are listed there. This allows a starter to be able to understand that in this next time slot, you're not starting anybody. Head to the next slide. This is another type of start list that you'll see. You can see right there between racer 543 and 558 that there is a 6 minute and 30-second gap between those two. If I didn't know that gap was there and I was the starter and I got in a really good rhythm, I might, right after 543, load up 558 and start them. And so what I do now is I make sure to read through my entire start list and identify anywhere that there might be a gap, and then put a star out to the side or write the word gap, or even the number of minutes and seconds there are for that gap, just to remind myself that, okay, take a pause right here. That way I won't misstart anybody.
really important that you make some U time prior to the start of a downhill and really review your start list and make sure, as Tobin said, you've denoted those start gaps on your start sheet. You'll also notice typically what we do is start downhills in 30-second increments of 0, 30, 0, 30. Usually the top 10 seated riders will actually get a 1 minute interval in between the riders, just to give them less chance of another rider catching. Any other questions regarding downhill? Oops, I see some.
I was curious if there was an advantage to starting later or starting earlier on the course. And if it's an advantage to start earlier due to rutting or whatever, what prevents riders from sandbagging their qualifying run?
You know what? I think, Tony, the biggest thing that you would see is biggest ruts, things like that aren't as challenging for downhill riders. What you'll see is weather. All right. And it has happened sometimes that the weather comes in during an event, and usually the slicker course will have probably a more effect on times. I've never heard of anybody sandbagging their qualifying run. Typically, your goal is to get in that top 10 where you actually have 1 minute increments in between so no one catches you. It also then lets you know if somebody ahead of you has a faster time, where you need to maybe push or take some additional chances to try and beat that time.
Do the marshals advise you if a rider's off course for some reason?
That is what they'll typically say is with their whistle or with their yellow flag, they will warn riders coming through or anyone in the immediate area based on that. The only time that we would know at the start or the finish line, if there's an injured rider that's blocking the course, or we actually have a course hold on at any time. At that time, then the chief or the PCP would make a decision about any reruns needed, and we would send those athletes back to the top. Any other questions before we move on? Very good. Well, we'll move into the next.
I have a question.
Oh, hey, Leslie.
Hi there. Sorry, I'm camping and I have low data mode, so I'm hiding back here. Anyway, I think Tobin mentioned seeding runs would run slowest to fastest. I've typically gone the other direction, but I've always wondered if that might be a better idea.
Typically, seeding runs we run. We use the ranking, whether it's a UCI ranking or goodness, I'm drawing a blank on the USAC, the downhill ranking for USAC. We would use that. The fastest or the highest ranked riders would be seated first. And I think that's what you were referring to, Leslie.
Yeah, I typically on a seeding run would go fastest to slowest, but I think I misunderstood what Tobin said there. So
yeah, Tobin, do you have anything to add for that, or?
I don't know.
Okay. Any other questions? Leslie, good to have you with us. I hope you guys are in the camper, that it's all repaired now. Moving on to mountain bike dual slalom, I put together a very similar checklist. It's almost ditto to the downhill. You'd want, again, pre-event communications. Has this course ever been raced on? Where is it being hosted? Is it at a ski area? Most dual slaloms, very similar to what Tobin elaborated on earlier. Dual slalom is derived from the alpine ski world. Dual slalom ski racing was very popular throughout the 70s into the mid 90s. Again, if you're at a ski area or wherever you are, it's important to have a medical operations plan in place. What's the closest hospital? Do you have, local EMS or fire department on site with trauma equipment? On average, most dual slalom courses, the athletes are walking up. Rarely is a lift used. In some national championship events, I've seen actual shuttles provided, like trucks, things like that, that get athletes to the start line. Again, very important to have a weather briefing or forecast daily on this for you, a practice round, seeding, or the finals or elimination round of competition. You want to do a pre-event course inspection. Make sure that all of your gates are secured. Again, you're going to have course marshals, medical team briefing prior to each event. You will definitely have a dual slalom rider course walkthrough and practice prior to practice. Team managers meeting usually is held in conjunction with the downhill team managers meeting. So you'll usually have had, practice runs on the dual slalom course. And again, any of those concerns by team managers or riders can be addressed at that meeting. We're going into qualifying and seeding. We'll discuss more of that later on in the presentation. Post a start list or your brackets, if you will. We'll talk more about that. The elimination round or finals is what it's called in dual slalom. Post the results, upload the results to USAC, debrief with event organizers and officials, and again, your post-event report to USAC. It's really important too that, I guess, back to the course marshal medical briefing, at a national championship event, you'll have spectators literally right in the middle of the course. So security and visibility is really important, that you have those things addressed and how you're going to handle that with the event organizers. Tobin, and now that I know I've got Leslie on the phone, she's got a lot of experience. Anything to add here before we go off this slide?
I don't have anything.
Very good. I guess it should highlight a lot of people perceive dual slalom bikes to be downhill bikes. They're vastly different. They have a shorter wheelbase, less travel. Typically, you will see 26 and 27-inch bikes being utilized in dual slalom. Versus downhill, you'll see a lot of 29-inch wheel bikes used there. Dual slalom, as you see, has a lot of formats. This is somebody put a lot of effort into this one with the banked corners, and then you can see they've actually used what we call study gates, or those are in the alpine ski world used for training gates for slalom. This is a photo of a couple of different start gate options. Most of these gates come from the BMX world. A company by the name of ProGate actually manufactures these start gates, but they make a smaller version that has 2 spots on it that we would use for dual slalom. The photo or the picture on the right shows another type of a gate that is a single gate, but you would actually have 2 of those. It also shows that you would actually have a set of lights that get mounted out further on the course that's visible to the riders. Those are really important, especially if you have any hearing impaired riders, for them to have the visibility of the lights. Any questions to ask about start gates or any of that?
Where is that single gate used? I've never seen one of those.
They would never use it as single, Leslie. They would be 2 single gates lined up side by side.
But where have you seen that before?
This Sea Otter Classic. The last time I was at Sea Otter, they had this exact gate, but 2 of them lined up side by side at the top of the start.
Durango, I guess it's Fort Lewis College has that, and they were at collegiate nationals the past 2 years. And then as well, there have been some dual slaloms at Chapman Hill in Durango where those same gates were used.
That particular gate has seen better days. If you remember, we had some problems with that, but all right, moving on. This is what a finish looks like, and very similar to downhill. When the gate drops, it will actually start the clock, and when the rider comes through and crosses the photo cell in the finish area, it stops the clock. This is just to highlight a little bit about the different gates. The photo on the right kind of shows a traditional, what we call paneled gate that's popular in giant slalom ski racing, and is probably more readily used in dual slalom mountain bike racing. The photo on the left is what we call a snowboard gate that actually has a hinged gate in the inside, but it kind of this triangular panel. A little bit nicer for branding. You can get more advertising on that. This is what a seating run looks like, and as you can see, you've got the starter in the inside there with an actual headset on. They're talking to the finish area. Very important. We'll talk about that in our best practices. It's imperative that your starter and finish, along with your seating, your staging whips, they are in constant communication with one another. Any questions about anything? Very good. This is what a typical bracket looks like, based on the seated runs. And again, you're gonna, there's, as you see here at the top in red, it shows what field you would allow into an event. If you have more than 5 riders, but less than 12, you're only gonna move 8 riders into the finals or the elimination round of racing. And again, you can see the different category. At a national championship event, just this year, this rule has been enacted. We only allow 32 starters per category. That's the maximum at a national championship. At some of the amateur events or smaller, non-sanctioned, non-championship related events, you could see as many as 64. Everybody always asks me how you lay one of these brackets out. It's real simple. If you will just take a list and go 1 through 16 across the top, and then starting at, you flip the numbers to go down. That's how one ends up with 16. And it's a lot more simpler than the black math that it looks like. Leslie, you've put a few of these together. You have anything to add here?
Hang on. Not so much. I mean, I typically do one that's only one-sided instead of two-sided.
Yeah,
Same
I-
thing.
I do the same. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you would just have 32 riders all on one side.
Right.
Yeah. Any questions regarding the seating or the brackets? Very good. Moving on to best practices. As we just talked about there, you can look at the guide there on the seating chart to determine how many riders you're going to let in. Those are always really important things to cover at a team managers meeting. Riders are always eager to hear how many you're going to let in. Each rider must complete a seating run on both courses. It's important to fill each gate so that you can get through the entire field. Don't be worried about getting, a one rider with a 2. Just make sure that both gates are filled, and then the athlete has completed a run on both courses on the red or blue. The other one that pet peeve of mine is always make sure the red course is always right. Red is always right. Blue is left. It's also, I highlighted it earlier. I'm going to revisit again. It is essential that your starter, timing, finish, staging whips are in sync with one another, in constant communication, especially in the elimination phase of racing. It is just imperative. Things move very quickly. The other one is in the elimination phase of racing or finals. What you would normally do is you are going to start with the categories that have the largest field size. For example, if you've got elite men, junior men, that all have fields of 32, and then women only 16, your elite women, junior women only 16, you're going to run 2 rounds of the elite men and junior men to get them down to 16. And then what you'll do is you'll run the entire field through of each category. Also, with that said, based on the how long the course is and having to hike to the start, in some instances you need to be mindful of the pace of an event. You might need to leave some breaks in there to allow athletes or riders time to recover once they get to the start. Tobin, you have anything to add there?
This is all great.
My only thing to add there is that you're talking skiers, right? And spectators, right?
That is correct. Red is always riders right. Prior to the start of seeding runs and also the elimination round, always test your gate for function. There are audio commands as well at the start that we need to make sure your audio level. This is really important in the finals because there's usually so many spectators on the side. Hearing sometimes can be a challenge for riders. Make sure you have a backup plan if you lose the generator or air compressor, or if the gate fails. In some instances, it's okay to do, one foot down for a start. Also, this happened to me several years ago. We had a perfectly working generator and air compressor, but unfortunately we didn't have fuel for it. So make sure that you have fuel on site near the generator. During the elimination phase of racing, please make sure that the brackets are updated and posted regularly, visible to the rider, in a visible spot to the riders there in the finish. You need, as the chief or PCP, you need to do all you can to minimize the need for riders to disrupt the timing or distract the timing or finish crew. Also, be sure to have good communications from the start, finish, also your course marshals, and confirm who in the finish will confirm that they heard that a rider missed a gate, and that penalty will be done. In dual slalom, the maximum penalty in the elimination phase, I should highlight, is only 1.5 seconds. There are provisions, though, if the course is longer, to adjust that, but make sure that that is done in the tech guide prior to the start of an event. The other one that's always good to do is prior to the start of the elimination round, establish a time limit that you're going to allow if a rider has a mechanical in time for them to get up and make their start. Any questions about dual slalom? You guys are way too quiet here. There's got to be some questions. Very good. Tobin, I'll let you wrap it up.
All right, so it's a new officiating season. When's the last time you changed the batteries in your stopwatch? I make this a yearly thing. I had my first event 3 weeks ago, and right before I left, I changed out all the batteries and made sure that I was good to go.
Tobin, you're assuming a level of organization that might be beyond me these days, but I appreciate the tip.
There's nothing like having your stopwatch stop right in the middle of an event, go blank, needs new batteries. Of course, that's why you always start 2 stopwatches, but anyway.
There you go. Well, just in closing, it's been Tobin and I's pleasure to host this webinar. I hope you guys gained some valuable knowledge about gravity events that you might not necessarily have, and look forward to seeing you at an event down the road.
I have a question.
Yes, Leslie.
So I want to go back to downhill. And so typically I've always done the seating runs, fastest to slowest, final runs, slowest to fastest. Last year at the national championships, for I believe an age class group, I had a mom that was livid that I was going to run slowest to fastest in the finals. Bonnie finally had to take over because this lady just kept screaming at me, and that I was going to kill people. So, I mean, obviously we know that we're going slowest to fastest for UCI race, elite men national championships, because that's for the show. Should we be considering going fastest to slowest for other non-spectator events potentially?
Leslie, during the COVID year, I saw it run that way, and it was to promote distancing, i.e. if you send your perceived fastest racers off first, there's going to be, less passing, less racing closer together. But then I haven't seen that since COVID year.
Right.
But, to your point, that was done for safety.
Yeah. And I know that, in one case last year, we did put somebody, we said this person is going to start last because she was super slow and we didn't want to mess things up but for the most part, we were going slowest to fastest. And as I said, I had a mom that just was all over me because of that.
Well, and sadly, I'm sure you pulled out the start list and showed her that there was sufficient time gaps that her son wouldn't be passed, and we've done every precaution we can to minimize that. But some moms just don't have any self-awareness.
And this was an ER. She was an ER nurse and was telling me I was going to kill everybody. And thank God Bonnie was there. Bonnie, where are you on this call? Because Bonnie bailed me out. But
So I guess in operational discussion, I believe you are correct. I think you could minimize the chance for passing by inverting that. But historically, for the show aspects, we've always done that. I mean, even at the mom and pop races, we've wanted to build it up.
okay.
You know, back to your downhill checklist there, that's really important that you pay attention to as that start list is created, to ensure that you've got adequate time gaps between the categories, that you're not there potentially could, you know, doing everything you can to minimize the chance for a faster rider to overtake the slower rider.
Right. And, you know, speaking of that, like when I'm doing a seeding run where I'm running fastest to slowest, those gaps are certainly bigger in a seeding run than they would be in a final run.
Right.
Just for the other people out there. So,
Yeah.
So in a category where you might have a big disparity in riders' abilities, would it be acceptable to insert some ghost riders in order to give the slowest rider more time before another rider started behind them?
Absolutely, Tony, that would be appropriate. Or you could also, depending on the size of the event, just leave bigger time gaps, you know, a minute or 2 minute in between riders. Any other questions? Well, again, on behalf of Tobin and myself, it's been our pleasure to host this. And I will stop the recording now.